the back?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome to this morning session on media ethics. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Eric Liu. I was a journalist in Malaysia way back in the 80s, but then I left Malaysia in 86 and migrated to Australia to work as a journalist for a while before I went to academia. So currently, I see myself as a media academic. Thus, the reason for organizing this session titled Journalism with a Conscience. So there is an assumption here that conscience, that's what maybe journalists lack at times. Why do I say that? Because in the annual survey of public integrity in Australia, journalists are way down in the bottom, next to real estate agents and car salesmen, used car salesmen. So that is the current situation where we are in terms of public integrity and honesty. Especially when it comes to reporting about ethno-religious issues, where race and religion are involved. There are so many moral questions that journalists are challenged every day in their line of work. So I thought maybe I will suggest 2 media sessions, and I propose it to UPI Next. The president, Nick Kaya, is here. I'd like to recognize him. And UPI Next has kindly agreed to sponsor these 2 media sessions. And I went around looking for veteran journalists whom I've met before and have actually read their work. So let me introduce the 3 speakers here. The details of their background is in page 39 of your program, so I won't go into detail. But together, the 3 speakers would have acquired more than 60 years of experience in journalism. I was talking to Dr. Yong. He's a general manager of Bernama, the national news agency. I said, about 20 years of experience? He says, no, maybe about 30. Andy Bayuni is the editor of Jakarta Post, and he currently writes a column on politics, culture, including race and religious issues. I met Andy way back in 2006. So I've read many of his work in the column, and he has made a name for himself on writing on Indonesian politics. Maria Reza. You can check out Maria Reza on YouTube. And she was a former journalist with CNN, currently a CEO for Rappler.com, an online news site that focuses on investigative journalism and other forms of investigative reports. So I will let them introduce themselves later. What is the purpose of this session? At the end of this session, I would like journalists and non-journalists to take away with them some practical ideas of how journalists can do better in their work in terms of reporting about race and religion issues. So the structure of the session, I'll give the speakers about 10 minutes to make an opening remark. So the question that they will address initially is the state of reporting of race and religion issues in Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, because they have personal experience with that. Now this is based on the assumption that the media in different countries, journalists face very different constraints in their reporting. Now in the annual press freedom ranking, Malaysia is ranked at 69 out of 197 countries by the Freedom House. Indonesia, 49. Philippines, 43. So what does it mean? Philippine media has at least more freedom to act. Journalists have more freedom to gather information compared to Indonesia. Philippines and Indonesia, media is ranked as partly free. Malaysia, as we all know, not free. But we will rely on these speakers to explain to us what are the constraints that we face. All right? But we also recognize that news gathering, news reporting is a very imperfect art. News gathering, the same story, same event can be reported very differently. For example, in Malaysia right now, we have this controversy about the usage of the word Allah in Christian publications. In Indonesia, we have conflict, attacks on the Ahmadiyya sect or Ahmadiyya group, community of believers by the majority Muslims, attacks on minority Christians. In the Philippines, we have issues with Muslim insurgency in the southern part of the Philippines. So we have veteran journalists here to share with us their experience. So we will see how the session goes, but I would like to encourage journalists and non-journalists sitting at the back to ask the curly questions, the hard questions, so that we can leave this session with a better idea of what journalists face every day and your notion of how they can do better and whether it is practical. And then session 2 at 2:30, 2 o'clock, which will be moderated by Nick Kaya from UPI Next, the National News Agency, the American News Agency, sorry. From 2 to 3:30. Hopefully, session 2 will take up the ideas talked about in this session and then end up with certain resolutions that we can follow in maybe next year to lead to some concrete actions. So let me just invite Datuk Yong, General Manager of Bernama, to tell us his experience. Thank you. Yeah.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope to be coherent and useful in my presentation this morning because I am up against a halo company here. It's not a bed of roses when you ask to talk about ethno-religious issues. Okay. So I spent more time as a business journalist, and it was only the last 7 years that I got into non-business kind of matters when I was editor-in-chief of Bernama until my appointment this year. And Dr. Lu was my contemporary business times. 20 years ago, we used to go around chasing these corporate chiefs for stories. Anyway, I'd like to start my presentation by mentioning that this off-quoted line among many Malaysians of my vintage or older, that how we miss the good old days of the 1950s and the 1960s. And they were interesting periods where during the time of Malaya's independence and during the formative years of Malaysia's establishment. Many people of my vintage or older also remember those times when there were very few invisible barriers towards racial cohesion. The people back then had no qualms about eating in the houses or the friends or the schoolmates. I remember many of my Malay colleagues that had gone to the Chinese or Indian friend's house and to partake very delicious kind of food and all that. You can't find that many Malay colleagues saying that these days. I suppose things changed in the 1970s when there was this rise in the fundamentalism of large sections of the population, and things changed. And I suppose these changes got in the way of how we perceive things around us. How do we actually do the reporting? Oh, that's okay. I want journalists. Oh, this is on very much on record. Yeah? Wow. So when these changes brought about this extra guardedness in the things we consume, as well as how we have other behaviors and perceptions. So this certainly led to a whole spectrum of things. Who do you mix with? Who do you deal with and all that? And I believe that somehow some misguided preaching may have contributed to this state of affairs, or this misguided perception and all that. So when generations upon generations are fed with such thinking, and it does not take a mathematician to calculate the extent of the damage in terms of the race relations in this country. So when you have such a situation, it makes it rather daunting, challenging to have a very balanced view of things at the end of the day. So it's only among the progressives, the moderates, who take a conciliatory stance towards people of a different ilk. So I give an example. Muslims who are progressive or moderate have no qualms visiting Beijing because they know that there will be plenty of restaurants serving delicious cuisine and all that are halal. This brings to mind the various festivals that we have in Malaysia. The standard fare is always chicken rendang. Everybody is playing safe. So, but I feel that there may be some hope yet for things to change and for greater acceptance of the ethno-religious diversity that Malaysia has. We have to fall back on this One Malaysia program espoused by the Prime Minister. I think this is something that's worth supporting. He has made a point that One Malaysia program is an affirmative action towards nation building. It's all about inclusiveness. I believe that one of the key pillars of this program, this thing that's often forgotten, the acceptance, will be given greater emphasis in time to come. So this acceptance, the greater emphasis on inclusivity will dovetail nicely if we look over the longer term in terms of race relations, in terms of how journalists deal with issues covering matters that affect our different communities. Well, I feel that this exclusiveness in ethnicity may run a deep emotional scars. If you have exclusivity, that's going to be very detrimental. So I think the Prime Minister's view about acceptance and the celebration of the cultural and religious diversity should be some of the more positive elements that Malaysians, journalists included, should cherish. Take the lovely Christmas tree outside the lobby. It is something for us to cherish. But if we have some misguided person writing somewhere and say, doesn't this hotel know that what is the official religion of this country, then it's going to be very dark days ahead. Okay, on the other hand, there are some who tend to be very dismissive of the One Malaysia concept and its fervent attempt to bring about greater healing and greater reconciliation after the bruising general election and other unspeakable mistakes in the past. Some days ago, some politician from my home state in Penang even suggested that the Prime Minister should change the One Malaysia to something that would highlight one particular race. This certainly goes against the grain of what the PM has in mind. I think If he is given enough time and leeway, this might change the fabric of the nation for the better and warm the hearts of those who cherish the diversity that we possess. If we allow people to throw a spanner in the works, then it's going to be a long road as far as many things are concerned, including journalism. In fact, I dare say that the PM has recognized what I mentioned at the start of this talk. It's going back to the good old days, if we can. So, I believe that once we embrace such things in our work, in our interface and all that, then there should be no problem as far as the work of the journalists are concerned. I have been given notification, so I think I like to end here. With a quote from the grand old man of the south of the border, Lee Kuan Yew. Over time, we have become one community with many races, many cultures. Are we a nation yet? I would not say we are. We are in transition, but we will always progress, provided we know where we are and know what we have to get there. This is an ideal which we may never completely reach, but because we have this ideal, we will continue to make progress. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Andy Bayuni, editor of the Jakarta Post. 10 minutes, please, Andy.
Good morning, Assalamualaikum. Thank you, Eric, and thank you to UVI for organizing this session. I'm happy that I've been put as a second speaker. I wouldn't like to be launching it because it's always difficult to launch. But I also would not like to speak after Maria because I know she's such a TV personality, but it would be hard to beat. I'll be speaking as an Indonesian journalist, but also I would use my opportunity as someone who had been involved in the establishment of the International Association of Religion Journalists. So I'll be doing a sales speech about this organization because I think it's such a wonderful thing, and I would like for my colleagues here, journalist colleagues who are in this room, to sign up and join this organization. I think we all know that all societies, all countries around the world are now becoming more and more multi-racial, multi-ethnic, and multi-religious. Malaysia is truly Asia. Indonesia is also very much a very complex and diverse nation. The Philippines also, but also Australia, where Eric is based, is becoming more and more Asianized in a way. And in Europe and States, through migrations and easy travel, communication technology, societies around the nation, around the world are becoming more and more diverse in terms of ethnicity and religions. And of course, with that, we are seeing more and more tensions and sometimes conflicts, or even full-scale wars between people of different religions within societies. And tensions and conflicts have become, I think, very much a staple diet for journalists in all these societies. I like the quote that Haja Amina Nabadi Sambo, the wife of the Nigerian vice president, made yesterday. She recited the Surah Al-Hujurat, verse 13. I'm just going to repeat this, the English version. God created out of you men and women, nations and tribes, made you nations and tribes so that we learn from one another, and that the most humble among you in the sight of Allah is the most pious. Most appropriate theme for this year's Global Peace Conference, the Unity in Diversity. The question is, for this session, I guess, the question is, where is journalism in all this? and especially given the fact that we are seeing more and more tensions and conflicts between religious communities in these different societies. The media is supposed to be just mirroring society. Should we journalists then just be passively reporting on these tensions, conflicts, or is there a role that we can play to help bridge the different communities, bring more understanding, and somehow maybe reduce or even try to solve some of the conflicts and tensions? And I guess this is where the question of journalists or journalism with conscience comes in. I personally think that journalists should be more proactive. We journalists should not become activists. We are not peace activists. But I think we can, through the practice of good journalism, we can actually make a difference. Because at the end of the day, I think we journalists, whether in Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, or anywhere, we are still part of the society. We want to make sure that people in our societies, they can coexist, and everybody respect their rights, and everybody, of course, enjoy the rights that are being guaranteed by the Constitution. But the question is, are we doing a good job in reporting religious or ethnic and religious tensions, conflicts? And generally speaking, this is from my own observation and also from talking to the other 22 or 23 founding members of the International Association of Religion Journalists, which we founded last year. We came to the conclusion that we, the media and journalists, we are doing a very, very poor, appalling job in reporting religion. And we even come to the point that very often the media is very much part of the problem in this conflict and not really part of the solution. We incite or inflame tensions and conflicts between the different religious communities. I will talk more at length about Indonesia. We already heard a little bit from Malaysia, and then we'll hear from Maria Ressa later about Philippines. But if you observe the situation around the world, in Australia, in Europe, in the United States, there is the rising Islamophobia, and part of that is being claimed by the media. Equally, in predominantly Muslim societies, there is this rising tensions with the religious minorities. Definitely this is happening in Indonesia, and I'm sure what we've seen is happening with the Muslim minorities in the Philippines, in Thailand, not even in Burma. So the problem is global, and the question is, how do we get it wrong when it comes to religion reporting? Well, for one, I think we journalists, we stereotype people a lot. We do that all the time. Sometimes deliberately, sometimes not deliberately, because that's what my friends, journalist friends in Australia, Europe, United States, they are very professional, but still they have the perception that Muslims are violent, some of them are terrorists. And they would not hesitate in writing Muslims are terrorists or violent things, because they believe that's what it is. And they stereotype, and then they would allow that prejudice or into their reporting. But we in Muslim majority countries, we do that as well. We do that all the time. And I can tell you this for sure with Indonesia. Now there is rising persecution against religious minorities in Indonesia. Eric talked about the Ahmadiyya. The Ahmadiyya in Indonesia is not regarded as Muslims, and there have been violent persecutions, even fatal persecutions against some of the followers, and it's still going on. And then we have persecutions against now the Shia community, again minority, even a larger minority. And then we have also had cases of specific churches near the capital in Jakarta being vandalized. And the media uncritically will be reporting that the Shia and the Ahmadis are deviant or heretic. As if they have we the media, we have the right to pronounce that these religions are wrong and these religions are right. I don't think that is the job of the journalist media to pronounce which religion is right or wrong. Unless, of course, we're working for specific media with missions to propagate religions. But I'm talking about general media for general reading. We should not be doing that. Now, the problem, I think, is sometimes comes from the journalists ourselves in reporting religions. We bring our own prejudices. I'm a Muslim. I guess I'm a Sunni Muslim. I never realized that I'm a Sunni Muslim until this issue about Sunni and Shia become an issue. I think even in Malaysia, nobody knows when you ask, "What are you Sunni or Shia?" What is that question? But now I realize that majority of Indonesians are Sunni. And the problem is, I think we journalists, when we report religions, it's very difficult for us to detach ourselves from our faith. In fact, we can't do it. The faith stays with us all the time. Even when we go to sleep, the faith stays with us. And the question is, how do we detach from our faith when we're reporting about other religions? And I think I will provide some of the solutions later on. But the thing is, I think we, the media, have very much become part of the problem and not part of the solution because we're doing all those things. Okay, we've got 5 minutes, 4 minutes.
1 minute.
1 minute? Okay, let me just jump to the recommendations. Number one, I think media and journalists should pay more attention to reporting religion. We should regard religions as more important as we are reporting politics, business, sports. I know for a fact that in most newsrooms, religion is something that is not treated as serious. Most of the journalists don't regard reporting religion as something as prestige. They want to avoid it as far as possible. And even the editorial policy, they want to avoid those issues because that is so explosive, difficult, and complex. It's better just to stay away. And the problem with that is that when there are tensions and conflicts, we get it wrong. We don't understand what is Shia, we don't understand what is Ahmadis, and we rely on what the ulamas are saying that these are the deviant sect, and we have to believe that they are deviant or heresy. So my advice is that there has to be a change in the mindset among those people who run the newsroom, the managers, the editors-in-chief, and get religion more serious. Allocate your best journalists and the best reporters to report on those things, and especially countries in the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia, religion is very much part of the life of people. So how can you ignore the most important issue in your society and then expect to do a good job? So you have to pay more attention in reporting religion. Number two, besides the change in the editorial attitude policy, number two, capacity of the journalists in reporting religion. And that's, again, very important because we tend to get it wrong and we have difficulties in detaching ourselves from the faith. And then therefore we tend to be, we create a problem even more. Given training for journalists in reporting religion. This is why I mentioned the International Association of Religion Journalists. We are organizing ourselves, and then we are now in the process of preparing conferences, seminars on how to do a better job in reporting religion. We just had one in Brisbane for Australian journalists, and then we are looking at organizing something along the line here in Asia, in Southeast Asia, hopefully maybe in 2014. Yeah. And finally, I think form organizations, join the IRJ, or in Malaysia, try to organize an association of journalists who report on religion. In Indonesia, we already have a similar organization called the Association of Journalists for Diversity. It includes religions, ethnicity, gender, and other issues that seem to be dividing, but we want to make sure that these are issues that unite. And I think that's what journalists should be doing, is we should try to promote more unity, not by being active participant, but by just reporting those issues professionally. Thank you.
Now we have Maria Reza.
Okay, sorry. I will take 15 minutes, but I'm going to go really fast, so please. Hello, hello. Yes, yes. Three things. I'll pull up a little bit. And this is from reporting. We were covering Jakarta in 1998 together, and I was in Malaysia. But I'll do three quick things if I have time, and then I'll speed through them. But the first is really, you have to look at it from the front lines. And for me, technology is critical. So I want to quickly take you through that. The second thing is, conflict reporting has its own challenges. I'll just show you 4 points from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from South Asia, and then the Philippines. The minorities always get it. In Indonesia, it's the Christians who are the minorities. In the Philippines, it's the Muslims who are the minorities. I've seen it from both sides. And then the last part is, again, where do things go? Because I think the solution is actually in technology. So I just want to remind you the things we've lived through. I turned 50 this year, and I was a journalist in my 20s. I just want to remind you about the technology. This is how I began, pen and paper, right? And then you had to go run out and get a payphone and tell your editor what was happening. Now you can live tweet. I've been live tweeting what we're doing. This is how I started. Remember, you have to actually pound the typewriter, and you had to do it fast. So we still pound our computers today, and our 20-somethings in Rappler actually tell me, why are you angry at your computer? And then I want to remind you of this. When the computer came up, the floppy disk, the fax. In 1987, when I was running the Manila Bureau for CNN, it was magical to put your script in, have an editor in New York or Atlanta, come out magically with all the edits. That was incredible. That was 1987. And last year, one of our guys, Rappler is less than 2 years old, one of our 20-somethings came up to me and said, "What's that?" And I said, "That's a fax." And then he said, "How do you use it?" So I had to show him how to use it. So what was so revolutionary at the beginning of my career is now an antique, right? Remember Pocket Bell Easy Call? This was such a, in the Philippines and in Indonesia, it was a sign of badge, kind of, you're kind of important. Remember how magical that was also, right? You get a beep, you call a number, you have to go find a payphone and call a number, and then you get an operator tell you the message, and then you get to send your message back. We don't have to do that now. One tweet of mine can reach 200,000 people. That's kind of cool too. And then this, in 1987 or 88, CNN sent me something that looked like a suitcase. And I thought, wow, let me open the suitcase. It was the first cell phone. And the suitcase was this, like basically this big. And I had to carry it slung over my shoulder because it was so heavy. Now it's this. I carry 2 or 3, and you can carry more than one cell phone. Just reminding you, it's all from late 80s until now. This is how I started a team of 4 people on a coverage, right? And when you're in a war zone, you actually can go away for a week or 2 and not have to file. That's important, because right now that's impossible. You're reachable anywhere. You have a sat phone now, right? So look at the technology and how it's changed. Then we had live shots. So I don't want to get into it. So when you do the live shots, what happens? Oh, well, at the beginning it started with every 12 hours you do a live shot. So you have 12 hours to put your piece together. Then it was every 6 hours. Then it was every 4 hours. And then when this came along, you guys know this? When we're in conflict, we just put it up. It used to be a satellite. Took 21 boxes, because I used to travel with it, right? Now, it's just this, which means you're live every hour. Every hour you're live. If you're live every hour, can you think of how much time you have to gather the news, right? That's a huge shift. Even when there's no electricity, this is on top of a cargo container in East Timor. We were going live. These are things that really drastically changed reporting for us. And of course we know governments lie. People lie. It's not just government. Everyone lies to a degree. There's a great book I'll tell you about later on. But this is hostile environment training in CNN. This was, I have my chem bio suit for a country that didn't have chem bio weapons, right? Which the United States acknowledged. John Negroponte, I spoke with him a few months back. He said that was the greatest intelligence failure of the United States. But we all trained. We have our gas masks, we have our chem bio suits, and we embedded with the US military. So again, that's kind of interesting. These are just my takeaways. Indonesia was an incredible time from 95 to 2000. Why? Because there's so much misinformation, and that's always part of conflict. And you cannot take apart intent versus skills. You've got to grow your journalists, and their intent is part of. Journalists hold a mirror to a society. You show me a society with critical journalists, it normally tends to be a more transparent society. If they're not transparent, then you have journalists who toe the line. And that's a measure. So I remember here, and I'm sure Andy remembers this, when the conflict first broke out in Ambon, one of the newspapers, I believe it was Compass, reported that 10,000, the number of people, and it was pro-Muslim, and then the Muslims went out and killed more people because of that. There are lots of things that happened during that time period. In Ambon, Indonesia, that was the first time we became part of the conflict, I think, because my name is Maria. I'm obviously Christian, right? And so I remembered walking into a mosque and then getting shut down, and then beyond that, getting an AK-47 pointed at me because of my name. So how did we navigate Ambon in 1999? We had one Muslim car with a Muslim soldier and his gun, and we had a Christian car with a Christian policeman and his gun. And they were off-duty policemen and off-duty soldiers, but it was like going through Beirut. You had to navigate the checkpoints. And my team really was naturally, 2 of us are Christians and 2 of us are Muslims. So that's how you do it. And how do you report it? You report it pulling up to God's eye view, because you cannot take a side. But again, that's not intent, that's skills, right? So those are some of the things. In South Asia, it was Muslims versus Muslims. I reported in Kashmir, I reported in Pakistan. And again, just by saying my name, you either get the interview, you don't, or you get shut down, or you're welcomed in. And the key thing there, if you're the reporter, is not to let it get to you, but to understand. Those are really our lenses. And I agree with everything Andy said, but the one thing I would put is that in the end, you cannot help who you are. The sooner you accept that, the better you'll be in your reporting. The Zamboanga siege is fascinating to me. This just happened. I think there's never been such prejudice against Muslims in the Philippines as now. There's really great anti-Muslim sentiment now in Zamboanga. And I don't think that the government has done enough to address that, as neither has the Indonesian government done enough to address rising religious intolerance. And we've seen that from the early 90s until today, right? There are political reasons why they don't do it, but they're there. If leadership is there, it makes it much easier. If leadership is not there, what do you do as a reporter? You point it out. And then the last part I want to talk about when it comes to conflict is, there's this idea that we can control it. It's the ideas of governments in Indonesia, in Singapore, in Malaysia. I will tell you, it is not possible to control it. And it will become increasingly impossible to control it now. And I'll go back, because these countries all had race riots to deal with. We all, to a degree, it scarred some of the nations in the 60s, right? In Indonesia, you couldn't find, Indonesia is the only one that had a Chinatown in 1998. It was fascinating. It's the only Chinatown in the world without Chinese characters. And what's interesting about this whole idea of control is, and you can take it apart, we can talk about this more later on, but in Singapore, every HDB, Housing Development Board, are actually mandated for racial and ethnic proportions. Does that work? It did for Singapore, but what do you do moving forward? And I think my solution, well, Indonesia, of course we know what happened in Indonesia. There have been major instances of riots from the 60s to the late 1998, and in Malaysia you've had your fill of these. I don't think it's control. I think it's about education, and I think it is about an empowered media, and I think it is not about censorship. Each of those countries flirted with censorship also. SARO rules in Indonesia, right? You cannot censor because it's still there. In fact, at the fall of Suharto, what happened is it was like lifting the lid of Pandora's box. In 1998, I was moving from city to city to city talking about different types of conflicts, separatist, ethnic, religious, you name it, right? So if you bury it, it will come back up and bite you. I think education is still the main thing. I left CNN in 2005 because I wanted to go home. I was tired of writing about other people and what they were doing, and I wanted to try to do something. So I went and I headed the largest newsroom. It's a multimedia conglomerate in the Philippines called ABS-CBN. This was our newsroom, and what did we do in 2007? We embraced the citizens, and this is a huge shift, right? So we can still talk politics about it, but we don't have to deal with that now because technology provides some solutions to this. Today, if you're not reporting correctly, or if you're pissing some people off, they'll come back and tell you immediately, right? The citizen journalists, social media, and this is where Rappler comes in. Rappler is less than 2 years old. We will turn 3, actually we'll be fully 2 years old by the end of December, and it comes from the root words rap, to talk, plus ripple, to make waves. In less than 2 years, we've become the 3rd top online news source because of social media. And I'll just show you, I think this works all around. These are the technological things you can tap. Our core is still professional journalism, technology. I think to be a media group now that survives, that does really well, you've got to be both media and technology. Because the technology exists to allow journalists to go beyond just telling stories, but also to harness. I think that's the activism part of what we can do now. We don't advocate for one thing, we allow people to build institutions ground up. We give voice to the people, far better now than before, and that leads to this part. The Wisdom of Crowds was a book, but you can call it crowdsourcing. Wikipedia is an example of crowdsourcing, right? 2.5 million pages of an encyclopedia that has no formal editors, no reporters, no researchers, and yet it's there. It's now, Encyclopedia Britannica stopped printing last year. And here's where we stand in Rappler. It's smack in the middle, and these are the technology things I want you to think about. We create content that is amplified on social media, which does the call for crowdsourcing. All of those little actions of crowdsourcing then become big data, and big data is the point that changes, that goes right back into the circle for content creation. I'll give you a quick example before turning it over. This is the way Rappler looks on the front page. We're multimedia. You cannot be print anymore. You can't be just TV. You have to be all. So the front page has video as well as the print parts, but here's the part that makes it interesting, the crowdsourcing. And every single story on Rappler has a mood meter, something journalists stay away from, right? And governments in our part of the world would like to think that if we touch emotions, we'll inflame. Emotions also inspire for actions, for positive change. And that's what this is. Neuroscientists say that up to 80% of how we make decisions as people is not based on what you think, it's based on how you feel. Advertisers have known that forever, right? That's why ads are the way they are. So we created this mood meter. Every story on Rappler has a mood meter, and there are 8 emotions that are chosen in conjunction with our Pulse. The Pulse Asia is a survey group, but we did it with psychologists and sociologists. These are the 8 emotions. Click how you feel, and then in the middle of the front page is this mood navigator. The mood navigator chooses the top 10 stories that have gotten the most number of votes, places it on the front page, and it chooses the mood that has gotten the most number of votes in the last 24 hours. Then you can take all that data, and in the month, you can put it per month or per year. In the month of May, I just chose the month of May because the Philippines had elections in May. If you take a look here, green is happy, red is angry, purple is annoyed. May 13th is our election day. So we were very happy leading up to election day, but on election day, we were angry and annoyed. Why? The results came in very slowly, that's why, right? Then, look how happy people were on the day the results of the elections were announced. That's here. No anger. And then this is what's interesting to me. At the end of the month of May 29th, Filipinos got really angry again, and they were angry because a comedian cracked a joke about a heavy broadcast journalist and about rape, and it really pissed Filipinos off. I mean, if you're Filipino, I'm referring to Vice Ganda and Jessica Soho. So look at that data. That data can do things, right? This is data. Facebook. If you're, please tell me who is on Facebook in this room. Raise your hand. Okay, not bad. Who's not on Facebook? 3. Okay, if this was a room of 20-somethings in the Philippines, you would all be on Facebook. That's the our demographic in the Philippines. Our median age is 23 years old. But look at the stats, and this is what I mean by big data out of social media, just so you get it, and I'll stop soon after. Globally, more than 10 million photos uploaded every hour. We click a like button or leave a comment nearly 3 billion times a day. 3 billion times. Let's look at YouTube. 800 million monthly users upload over an hour of video every second. How many seconds have I been speaking? That's big data. And then the last one is Twitter. The number of tweets grows around 200% a year. By 2012, this is the last numbers I had for it, it exceeded 400 million tweets a day. So how do you make sense of all of that? You do this. It's not a Rorschach test. This is actually human behavior on Twitter. You can map it. Imagine the things that allows you to do. This is all from 2011, which is part of what pushed me to set up Rappler in 2012. Hashtag Japan. You remember what happened March 2011 in Japan? The earthquake and the Fukushima reactor accident. This is the way our societies behave when crisis hits. It's the same pattern in the Philippines during our typhoons. We gravitate and form hubs of information, and most of the time those hubs of information are government and news groups. That's where you get it, and that happens in every instance. Hashtag GOP is the American human superorganism. This shows you, this is 6 months before the last US presidential elections, and by pulling down the Republicans, you automatically map the Democrats and the Republicans. Is there no better visualization of how divided Americans were between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama? It's not something you make up, it's not a survey, this is human behavior, right? And then this is hashtag Egypt. That's what a revolution looks like. And if you look at it, every single one of these hubs are far smaller than hashtag Japan. Why? Because you're fighting the government. So they're smaller hubs. I like to think about it like little terrorist cells. Now this one is interesting, hashtag Syria. 16 months after rebels began fighting President Bashar al-Assad. And then when I looked at this, this looks like a precursor to this. If this begins to look like this, does that mean we'll have a revolution in Syria? And it's another presentation to talk to you about the predictive powers of data analysis and what we can do, but it's there. I just want to talk to you about that, and I'll leave you with just this one thing. This is Super Typhoon Haiyan. This is what it looks like from space. This is crowdsourcing that impacts the real world, and I want to show that to you. This is what it looked like on the ground. We were not able, this is the first time in nearly 30 years that we were not able to communicate with an affected area for more than 24 hours. At most, 4 hours, maybe 4 hours. We never had communications cut off. When we did, this is what we found. I want to show you what you can do with this stuff. This is all on Rappler, but I'm going to pull it live, and I'm going to leave you with that because it's really cool stuff. You can track. This is something we set up with Crisis Tracker, right? So this is the map of the Philippines. You can choose any one of these places and see every single tweet that came from that area. So that if you are looking for someone, if you are trying to find what's happening, you can see it immediately. Let me change it one more time. That's Masbate, and here, Mondragon. Again, you get different things for location, right? Geolocating tweets is still in its infancy, but you can do amazing things with it. I want to show you this. This is also on Rappler, but again, it just takes that Twitter stream and you can do things like this. You can cluster conversations and you can pull up exactly what's happened in one area and the related conversations with it. For disaster risk reduction, it's incredible stuff that you can do, and we're working with both the UN and the Philippine government to try to give this to you. This is what the front page of Rappler looks like. You've got that, and then you've got the mood navigator that takes you. This is how you navigate the site. Let me end this with just, I don't want to take up too much time. Very quickly, you can categorize and map this. There's all stuff on Rappler that you can see. You can categorize and map the tweets for disaster risk reduction. It moves faster than government because it uses everyone else. This is crowdsourcing to help save lives. Rescue mapping. People map when they need rescue, and they do it through their cell phones. Since there's 104% in cell phone penetration rate in the Philippines that works. You can map relief operations and relief needs. This is a crowdsourced map, and you can see that on Rappler. Cell signals dropped, so then afterwards, in the weeks after, we asked people to map cell signals. We asked them to map roads and infrastructure, and they did. Where is the road passable? Where is it not passable? And relief, what do you need? They mapped it. This is the last thing I want to show you. Working with Google and Facebook. The path of the storm had 220,000 people in it, and you lost contact with them. One of the greatest needs, which the government wasn't prepared to do, was to actually help find people, loved ones who you can't contact. And what we did is we worked with both Facebook and Google, Google's Person Finder, and Facebook's facial recognition software. And we got someone on the ground, one of our team members, started just taking pictures of people waiting on relief lines, waiting to get on the plane at the airport, holding up a sign with how to reach them, and it's searchable. You can type in the person you're looking for and find them. This is what technology enables. And we report differently now because it's an era of bloggers, of social media. I'll just end with this. This is one of our reporters who actually was lost for 4 days, and one of the worst things that you go through is the uncertainty when you're sending someone out, right? And I just want to show you his blog. So he was basically, we had no contact, we didn't know whether they were alive or dead. For 4 days, that's virtually impossible. Even in a war zone, I was never out of touch with CNN that long. But look at what he wrote. This guy is, Bob knows him, Paterno Esmaquel, comes down with this. And this is the times we live in. We're covering, a day after he returned to Manila, and I slapped and hugged him at the same time because he should have found a way to contact us. But look, they drove right back in, and he does this. Prayers it's part of our makeup. It's inspirational, it provides hope. I pray for the grace to help the people we need. I pray for the strength, intellect, and heart to do justice to their stories. And I pray for stories that inspire and uplift, that bring hope and not only despair. Please pray with us as we make this long journey. I hope we can help you too in any way. Amen. That is the journalist today. That's our role. We converse directly with our audience. We work collaboratively with the government, but we always tell the truth. Because if you don't start with the truth, you can't solve the problem.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Maria, for an informative journey through Rappler.com. But is technology the solution? Maybe yes, maybe no. I see technology as a tool. I see in the audience journalists in their 20s, very young journalists, some may be older. The question that you may ask yourself right now is, well, I have access to the technology, and I know more than what I am able to write about. I have many stories. I'll bring it back. Imagine me working as a reporter in Bernama, for example. When I take my story back on ethno-religious issues, after crowdsourcing for information, lots of information. I have a great story to tell. I take it home. submitted to Datuk Yong. After a while, the story may see the light of day, or it may not see the light of day. So that is the question that I would like us and the speakers to address. And the audience, please feel free to interject and ask any questions. But just to summarize what Datuk Yong, Andy, and Maria has said. Starting from here, Maria, I get the feeling that technology is the solution. Andy talked about the need for journalists to be detached. He believes in detached reporting, as opposed to being a peace activist as a journalist or a media activist. And then Datuk Yong talked about the need to be sensitive to the race relations issue in Malaysia. And likewise with Indonesia, we have SARA, SARA, race and religion and other sensitive issues that journalists are in a way expected to treat sensitively rather than to avoid. In Malaysia, we have similar issues. Treat sensitively rather than to avoid. Now the fact is that journalists who are here, you know more than what you're able to do. So let us to get an idea of the internal factors, the constraints that journalists face within the newsroom culture. So we may start with Dr. Yong, and we talk about the culture, the environment in the main newsroom, and then followed by Andy and Maria.
Just a quick one, I don't want to say, but I remember when I first joined Panama many years ago, I was, sorry. Right. I think one of my first assignment when I joined Panama many years ago was to cover a political rally. It was an opposition party, and then the guys spoke a number of interesting things. I thought it was very good, because here is something for the people to know what this particular party stood for and what it wanted for the people. And came back and submitted the story. It didn't see the light of day. And I asked, why? Why did it not get used? Because I thought I had written it nicely, very good, facts are correct and all that. So I was told by some senior person, no, this is just for information gathering. It is for us to know what the other side is thinking, so that we can tell our side how to respond. Oops. That was a very sharp learning curve for me. Fast forward to this year, I got instruction, can you actually write to this opposition party? We would like to cover the National Congress of that political party. And I had to write, so, and we got the green light, and we were, I think, the only government organization giving the full coverage to this particular opposition political party. And so then recently there was also another opposition political party. We gave full coverage. So we think that things have changed. The perils of being in Panama is that sometimes people may say that you must remember who is paying your salary. And so they sometimes think that in a government institution, then you usually get people who are pro government to be on, and if you get somebody who's got different views, then it's a bit no. But things have changed, because we do get a lot of people with alternative views being run, transmitted views transmitted by Panama. I think we are moving towards a more level playing field. Although certain things are not so okay, but we are improving. We're trying to, because under the new thinking of the government, it's going to be more inclusive. That's it, I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the attitude in the newsroom in Indonesia in general is to avoid reporting on religious conflicts because number one, it's such an emotional issue, and number two, because I think the media, the journalists, they just don't know how to handle it. And this is partly the legacy of 30 years of suppressing stories like this under Suharto. Now we have the freedom to do that. And even there, I think many journalists and editors don't have the confidence. And they just try to play safe. Rather than getting it wrong, they just not going to report anything. Under Suharto, we were not supposed to write stories about religious conflicts because if we report them, we would be accused of inflaming the tensions. But what happened to the Suharto is, during the 30 years, as if there was no problems and there was no religious conflict, there were, but they were just not reported. In fact, the Union of Churches in Indonesia, they had records, and they said more than 600 churches were vandalized or closed down during the Suharto years, and these were not reported. Now that we have that freedom to report, the question is, are we going to report these cases or not? Many journalists just continue their tradition, just play it safe. One or two media, I think Jakarta Post is probably one of them, we decided we will report them. But we will report those cases professionally and wisely. Then you have to be careful because you don't want to be accused of inflaming. But we would run those stories on the front page for sure, because for us, any violations of the rights of any members of the citizens or the communities in Indonesia, that's a big story. Human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religions, and all those things for Jakarta Post is a big story that we want to report, and we want to report them well. For the reason is because we want to raise this issue to the public and make sure that the state, the government, the police do something about it. If we don't, I think the police will have an easy job. Well, the public is not making any noise, we don't have to do anything. And we are giving too much space to the radical Islamic groups, because these are the ones who have been vandalizing, attacking, terrorizing, persecuting the religious minorities. The radical Islamic groups, they are very small. They don't even represent the Muslims in Indonesia, but they're very vocal and they're very violent. And they seem to be getting away. And the reason for that is because the media are keeping silence and allowing them to get away. And I think there should be a change in the mindset of the media, the managers of the media, and that we should be reporting them. But of course, we should be reporting them in a way that would raise the public awareness that there's something wrong with some members of the communities in the country, and they need help, and the government should step in. That's not happening because we, the media, the majority of them are keeping silent.
Yes. In the Philippines, we have a lot more leeway. I mean, when I ran the largest news group in the Philippines, you can report anything, and then the major part is standards and ethics. I think there are two things that all the news groups from our countries have to deal with. Number one is standards and ethics. It's important to have a strong standards and ethics manual for every news group, and not everyone does. And then the second one is, how do you deal with corruption? Our countries are rife with, endemically corrupt. You can see many of these things. How do you change that? When I was head of ABS-CBN News, it was a fireable offense. I fired a third of our news group. When we catch somebody, and of course our labor laws are very difficult if you fire based on an ethical rule, right? The standards and ethics of journalism. So we had our lawyers go in a whole different, look at it in a whole different light. So we fired, but then again, that's not enough. How can you hold the journalists accountable if the society is corrupt? The journalists are only a part of the society that they're reporting on. Very simply for me, it's this. Globally, news groups are moving away from a world of authority to a world of authenticity. And you can choose to join it or not. If you don't join it, you will lose credibility. The kids coming up today, and again, the Philippines is a very young demographic. Indonesia tends to be a young demographic as well, but our median age in the Philippines is 23 years old. And so in 2010, ComScore called the Philippines the social media capital of the world. If you are hiding behind your organization, which when I was much younger, you could do that, because it's actually, going into social media means making yourself more vulnerable. right? That's what that means. And in our world today as journalists, you can no longer do that. Andy has had to deal with attacks because he speaks about the fact that journalists aren't covering it. I've dealt with attacks. That's the world today. You have to move away from hiding behind organizations. Organizations speak won't cut it with this younger generation. To the world of authenticity, you have to speak as who you are. And if you speak as who you are, that means that, number one, I'm an Asian American. I'm 5'2", I'm not 6'2", which means I see the world differently, right? So all of those things are built into it, and I think a lot of the prejudices that were there in the past could actually be addressed with transparency. There's a younger generation, the digital natives in all of our countries are growing up connected, and they're growing up with global values. That's where I place my faith right now.
Just to summarize, what Dr. Yong, Andy, and Maria have said reminds me of an interview or conversation that I held in 2006 with one of the renowned journalists in India. His name is P. Sainath. You can search him out on Google. He has won many awards for reporting on the Dalits and the untouchables in the outskirts. He belongs to the Brahmin class. He goes to the countryside, he lives with the untouchables, and he tells his stories. And I remember this quote that he said, journalism, what is the main purpose? Journalism is to provide a service for the people, not those in power. So which reminds me of what Maria said. Our job as journalists here, and as bloggers and writers on this site, is to confront and challenge those in power. So which leads to my question now. We know that for a fact, in the Philippines, it's one of the most dangerous places for journalists to operate. Likewise, to an extent, in Indonesia. Journalists are killed for doing their job, sometimes for not abiding by their paymaster. For many reasons, corruption is very high. In Malaysia, we have our own risk too. We confront and challenge. Like I said earlier on, journalists here, you have more information. You know more than what you're able to write. So what I would like speakers to address now, if journalists in Burma or mainstream media were to confront and challenge those in power, were to expose the corruption, the systemic corruption in so many levels of society, what are the risks that they are exposing themselves to? And a follow-up question which we will not address in this session, but maybe the next session, moderated by Mr. Kayaya. And I would like to invite all of you here to attend the second session because it is follow-up, where we will think about concrete steps, where journalists can be protected for doing their job well in Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia. So, just as an introduction, what are the risks that journalists in Indonesia, Philippines, and Malaysia, what are the risks that they are exposed to when they confront the challenge of power? Well, let's start with Dr. Yong, please. No? Okay, Andy, can you please start?
Well, we don't have any more government censorship. We don't get any more calls from some generals in the military. We used to that in the 90s, 80s. The government used to be the #1 enemy of the media. That's not the case anymore. In fact, the government is scared because every time they place a phone call, if the president places a phone call to me or to the editor-in-chief, it would get reported that the president is trying to influence the news. So they stay away. Same thing with the generals and all the government officials. And we have a press law since 1999 that actually guarantees our freedom to operate. It's wonderful. Maybe it's too wonderful that it cannot be applied. When a journalist is under the threat of somebody else, the police, especially from the radical Islamic groups, the police will not come and help you. Although under the law we are protected by, the law protects us, but the police says, well, the radical Islamic groups, forget it. So that's what the problem with Indonesia today. Journalists, although we don't face any problems or harassments or threats from the government or the military, you get threats from radical Islamic groups, sometimes from powerful politicians, powerful businessmen, who don't like what we write. And what they do, they will just send truckloads of people to harass, intimidate, and even there have been cases when newsrooms were vandalized, attacked, vandalized, and even occupied. And it only takes one case, and then for the other, it has this impact of what do you call chilling effect. Yeah? Other journalists, other media become scared about reporting particular issues, especially reporting on radical Islamic groups, because they learn that if you do that, and you're going to get attacked. When I was the editor-in-chief of Jakarta Post, I was getting phone calls from people, anonymous calls. Sometimes they were threatening, and they asked, what is my religion? And I said, I'm Muslim. And they said, you cannot be Muslims because you're protecting this other religions. And then they said, just watch your back. Okay. But this is has become part of the territory of reporting in Indonesia. Thankfully, nothing happened to me, but those phone calls can be intimidating. But I think I'm holding on to the fact that it's the media's job to report on these issues, and sometimes we have to take the risk.
I think that the media in Malaysia is attempting to push the envelope further and further in order to, what Maria was saying, the writing from the point of authenticity rather than from the point of authority. But sometimes you get groups, certain vested interests, who may not like what you said, what you have written, and then they will say something, issue a statement. I think that's a very interesting case recently when some corporate figure wrote a column in this Malay newspaper, and he was grieving over the death of his son, and then he published a poem written by his son. And I don't know, then suddenly one royal house issued a statement and said, are you referring to the Sultan? Because that poem alluded to this, you know. So these are things which those in power, they seem to be not very comfortable if the media were to actually say certain things which is the truth. But we try our best, especially when Malaysians, when we say about corruption, and definitely when we want to report. Sometimes in our society, when that person is of a high standing or a high ranking, and before he enters into court, then you get advice from here and there. Oh, since he hasn't been brought to court, it's not nice to put his name, although we know that that guy stinks, and then he is going to be judged the next day. But they will say, oh, don't write about it yet until he appears in court, and then that will be the right thing to do. So these are things, but it is kind of funny, you know, when Malaysians, they have a voracious appetite. Who is involved in this scandal, who is involved in that scandal, you know. When it's other people, then it's okay. When it comes to their bosses or their associates, then they place a phone call. Can you not please run the story because my boss is involved in this Kalawat case? Yeah, it's not nice. No, you just say a senior official, no need to go and say that who and who. You know. So, if we want to be transparent, we better be transparent all the way. You know, we must not have triple standards, you know, the kind of thing. not double standards, triple standards. One rule for this person, one rule for that person. So when it comes to people involved in these certain scandals, oh, it's not nice to write about it. You know, you just mentioned it's just a senior official will do. No need to identify the ministry or department concerned. So anyway, we are trying our best.
I think two things. In Zamboanga, I just wanted to show you an instance. The two things are ignorance, and the last is empowerment, the second, right? So the first one of ignorance is, again, the whole idea of censorship. Censorship or control, both the same things in different ways, right? Power will never want to be challenged, because part of maintaining power is that the appearance of all-knowing and all-knowing. That's not the world today, and no one believes that. Again, look at Haiyan. Every government tries to control a death count because a disaster is political. If a government doesn't look like it's capable of taking care of its own people, then there's a political impact to that. But again, in Zamboanga, I'm sorry, there's so many thoughts to go through because these are issues we deal with all the time. In Zamboanga, we had a government that said on national television that the way, remember if you're not familiar with it, Muslim rebels instigated the siege of Zamboanga City, which is a hub of commerce in the Philippines. And it's a city that has very high prejudice against Muslims. Muslims are 5% of the population in the Philippines of about 100 million people. In that one, the way they were able, the Muslim rebels who did start this started using people as human shields. And the way the government said that they pulled them out, decided who were hostages and who were not, was just by saying who could say the Our Father. And they said this on national television, as if you're a Muslim, you don't know the Our Father. I know Muslim prayers. I guess it starts with that, and if it's institutionalized in government, then you have a problem. And I think that's the journalists have to point that out. And government will not like it when you do. The second is empowerment. So this shows you why it's important for this kind of engagement with the citizens and why journalists can help empower citizens and help build institutions bottom up. On August 26th this year, there was a Facebook post that asked Filipinos to go out on the streets against this anti-corruption scandal. In 7 days, 100,000 people gathered in a national park. It was called #MillionPeopleMarch. It's the first instance where social media reached out from the virtual world and transformed the real world. What's happened since August 26th? That pork barrel fund, it's called the Priority Development Assistance Fund, which has been part of Philippine governance since 1922, has now been declared unconstitutional. Change does happen. If you bring the people with you, the government does respond if you're a democracy. But silence will kill any initiative like that. In the end, transparency can lead to a period of a little more chaotic time. I like Joseph Schumpeter called it the creative destruction, right? Which is basically what the Philippines is going through right now after this institutionalized corruption has been exposed. But I hope in the long run, our society and our democracy comes out of it stronger.
Thank you. The time is 12:30 because we started late. We may end late. So, 1 o'clock, we'll finish the discussion. But before I open up to questions from the floor, I hope you had questions to ask. I just want to summarize some of the key words used by the speakers. Maria used the word empowerment. The reality is in a Malaysian context, what we write about, we have bloggers here, for example, Dr. Zaid here, to be speaking the second session, and KJ John, he writes a column, and Bob Teo also writes a column. The things that we write about today were the things that we couldn't even talk about just 10 years ago. So in a way, technology has freed us, has empowered us. And Maria used the word crowdsourcing, that means getting information from the people. That is where journalists work. We need to work together with the people. So the question that sorry, my thoughts all over. The question that I would like to address now to the speaker is, when a journalist's conscience, before that, let me backtrack a little bit. Dr. Yong did mention the key phrase, we are trying to do our best. Respectfully, many Malaysians who have read mainstream media is saying, well, your best is not good enough. You got to do better. So my question is, because we are talking about reporting of ethno-religious issues, the stakes are much higher. Thus the question, should reporters work reporting on race and religion issues? Should they be held to a higher ethical standard beyond the principles of reporting fairly and accurately? We can spend some time to talk about that before I open it to the floor. Andy? There you go. Sorry to put you in the situation.
They want to grill me this afternoon. Anyway,
Should reporters be held to a higher ethical standard beyond reporting fairly and accurately?
Back to what Maria was saying. All about education, all about maturity. The majority of Malaysians ready for this yet, you know. So I think a lot has got to be done in terms of education, so that people will be empowered, people will be armed with information, so they make very judicious judgments, balanced judgments and all that. So as far as the ethno-religious reporting is concerned, we can only move positively to that direction if we have an audience that is mature enough to accept whatever that is going to be written. But if the audience is not ready yet, then you can actually see ripples which may turn into waves to say that, hey, this guy is out of line. What is he trying to do? We don't like this pointing up to us, you know. So when you want this ideal situation to arrive, then it has got to work both ways. Education for the journalist, education for the audience. If not, then some guys will be well connected, may say, this guy is trying to incite certain things, a rebel rouser, and sort of thing. So I think the level of maturity has yet to arrive for greater reporting on this ethno-religious matters on a more authentic level. But then again, that should not stop journalists from trying to actually provide a balanced view, because this is a multicultural, multiracial nation, and we have got to be alive and sensitive to the various communities in this country. So what I'm saying is that there should come to a level of greater understanding in time to come. But without an education, that level won't be reached. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I think given the sensitivity of the issues of race, ethnicity, and religion, I think journalists should be reporting these issues, the gold standard of journalism. I don't think there's any specific issues when it comes to reporting on religions. Basically, what we have to do is just report them in the way we would report other issues professionally. But I think the additional aspect would be wisdom, given that what you report could actually inflame the tensions and conflicts. But so this is where training is very important, because the majority of newsrooms, I know in Indonesia, but I'm sure also it happens in other parts of the world, just try to ignore religion completely, even though they know that religion is very much an important part of the life of the people. So it is time that we have to change that and then start reporting religion diligently, but also professionally. And I think in that way, I think journalists don't report religions only when there are conflicts or tensions. Report them throughout, even when they're in peace. Report them about the different religious communities in your religious religion in your community, and bridge that, be the bridge that brings the understanding between the religious communities. And I think the media would be very much part of the solution and not part of the problem, even when the tension has started to erupt.
I'll just second what our panelists have already said. It is about education. I think it's hard to educate an entire society. That's part of government's job, and the private sector as well. But one of the ways you educate a society is through the journalism it consumes. And so, like Andy, I think we have to train our journalists. And that's what we've been trying to do for the last 25 years through the region. The challenge there, of course, is it's not just education, it's also courage. The journalists have to have the courage, and they have to feel that that is part of their purpose for being journalists. You're never going to get rich being a journalist. If you take that first bribe, though, that changes everything else, right? So these are things within the journalists' communities. In the Philippines, we're trying to have a crowdsourced reporting of journalists who are corrupt. It's very interesting, but I won't go there anymore. I guess I'm saying it still goes back to the standards and ethics of journalists, the training that does need to happen, but I don't think that training for religious issues is any different from the training that you have for politics. It is just developing the sensitivity and realizing that you cannot be emotional about this emotional topic. It's what's the word I'm looking for? It's viscous. It's in your gut. Religion is prime to all of us, just like power is to the people in power. Right? So I think it's a matter of understanding that it takes courage, because if you do not report that this group is being intimidated or harassed by this group, it will blow up. And that is your society, and you don't want to see that happen.
Thank you. I'd like to open the floor. Any questions that you may have, please feel free to ask questions. Yes, please. There's a mic in front, I think. Yeah, just push that one.
Yeah, okay.
Hello again. So good afternoon. I am Patty from the Philippines. I am from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. So my question, first, I took this subject on journalism, although it's not my major, but our professor told us that the nature of journalism is adversarial. And so usually the journalists, especially if they start with their jobs, they're very idealistic and they really want to change the world. But then eventually they realize, especially those who work in the big newspaper companies, which are private businesses, they realize that at the end of the day, they still work for a business, and they are still limited to the rules of the business. And so these journalists, it's like saying, sort of simplistically, that they have to sell a story because they need the money for it. That's why Ma'am Maria Reza told us a while ago that you cannot get rich being a journalist. But then, what are your insights about these people who, even if they are very informed already, they have finished their schooling, they know about these things, but at the end of the day, they choose not to be that ethical, especially in their jobs. What can you say about it? Can we actually blame them that they're not being ethical because they don't have, they won't be able to have food on their plates?
Thank you.
So what about it? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I think can we blame them? I don't think it's about blaming. Again, we talked about how the journalists are a reflection of their society, right? And in general, think about it like this. Early last year, we held a Supreme Court Chief Justice accountable for corruption. Judicial reform has started. Political reform has started now, hopefully with the Million People March and with the declaration of the pork barrel as unconstitutional. The third is you need to go to the journalists. But who's going to call for that? The politicians and the private sector who pay the journalists don't want to let go of it, don't want to talk about it because they get what they need. They're assured of the coverage that they want. And then the journalists themselves are not prone to really talk about this. We have a group called Media Nation which tries, but it's the same people. And our efforts are still very limited. And if you're one of the ones speaking up against corruption, and it's very similar to Indonesia, you're kind of marginalized, threatened, intimidated. Those are some of the things you deal with. But I'll challenge, so on that thought, it's always an upward and an uphill battle. But I think the people can lead the charge. And that's part of the reason I'm so optimistic. That's why hashtag Million People March was a breakstone, a tipping point for me, because it showed they could. Number two, I would question the definitions of journalism that we were taught. I've certainly changed from the time I was with CNN until now. The nature of journalism is adversarial. It's a form, again, even if you look from that came out of the 1920s in the United States when the New York Times came up with it, right? But it's changed. It's, I think a more accurate definition now is that journalism holds both private and public sector accountable, but in Rappler, we're actually setting up a civic engagement arm that is collaborative, both with the public and the private sector, because there are huge problems that government can't deal with on its own. Super Typhoon, Yolanda being the first one, right? If they can't do it, do we just cast stones at them and blame them? It doesn't work that way anymore, because Metro Manila is the second most disaster-prone city globally. The Philippines is the most disaster-prone, third most disaster-prone. This is according to the World Disaster Report in 2012. So the disruption in every industry is happening, and journalism is being redefined, I think, by technology. I've laid out the philosophy, I'm looking at it with. And that goes right down to the third part of my answer to your question, which is, if we journalists don't hold ourselves accountable, the people will. And that is, in the end, our business model is based on that now. As social media becomes more chaotic, as the internet has made things more chaotic, the people will look for voices of credibility. And credibility is no longer defined by how much money you have to broadcast. Before, it used to be, you have a TV station because you spent a lot of money, you have a franchise, and you've got equipment to be able to broadcast. Now, and a perfect example is Rappler. We're a very little group. You know, we're less than 100 people, and yet we're punching above our weight because of technology. And let me give you an example of the economics of it. When I was head of ABS-CBN News, this one you can't tweet, or you can't, but so you have an idea, right? I would spend annually for equipment $2 million a year. In Rappler, we started our studio with $150,000. That's the difference. Civic engagement, collaboration, I think those are the buzzwords of the new world, and the people will be the ones to judge credibility, because they will come to you if you're credible. And if you're not, they will leave you.
I will have to say that I was young once, and ideal. But no, I think Maria is right. It all has to do with credibility. If you don't have credibility, the audience will know it, and they don't trust you. So it's going to be your call. When you enter this profession, and then your ideal, can keep them. But at some stage, you come across this problem, that is dilemma. Should I report the way my boss wants it against my own principles of journalism, or what should I do? And we all come across that situation, and then we have to make that call ourselves. Some of my friends just quit the profession completely. Others, they change to a different media where they can actually practice good journalism. I'm not going to tell you how you have to do it, but it's going to be your decisions, and then, because at the end of the day, if you want to be a good journalist, it has to do with your credibility, and the public knows it. I have friends who are very, very good, very professional, and they have moved on to televisions owned by politicians and business people, powerful, and sad to say that their credibility is going down the drain because they completely submit to the wishes of the owners, politicians, and business people.
for me, in Malaysia, when I look at the press kit, I will only assume that it contains information, pictures of the personalities at that particular press briefing conference. But in certain countries, they say you need a little envelope with cash. So that hasn't crept into Malaysia as yet. So we don't see that being institutionalized among the journalism fraternity. Okay. But if you have journalists who are on the take, their writing, their presentation will show. We may not show it the first time, second time, third time, but over time, if you see why is he or she promoting or harping on that particular issue, we will know. So as superiors in the media organization, we'll have to take steps in order to transfer or to make sure that that person will not go to that particular beat so that he or she can actually be on the take. So that would be one of the countermeasures. But if that person is crooked, he or she could be crooked all the way unless he or she sees the light at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Question? Yes.
Okay, my name is Wei Wen. I'm from Focus Malaysia Business Weekly. So my question is this: in every newsroom, you have your young reporters, you have the more senior reporters, and you have the editor. So the young reporters, as the earlier question says, will be more idealistic. They'll be angry why their stories are changed in a certain way. And then you have the more senior reporters who will tell the younger reporters, sometimes it happens, and then the editors will make the decision. So coming to Dr. Yong's point where we try our best, how do editors then, or perhaps more interested in how Bernama deals with that kind of dilemma, and how do you train your young reporters to be, to stay with their principles, and when their stories get changed to omit the name of a certain Tan Sri or a certain Dato Sri, how do you, justify that decision to them?
Okay, I tell you, Bernama being government, the topmost priority is that you should be able to report governmental news tops. Okay. Then it comes to the private sector, then it comes to others. I spoke earlier that there were challenges in the past where people held on to very rigid views that we should only be dishing out governmental news. But over the last 2 years, I think we are becoming more open, and we know that this is what the people want. So we have to be more proactive in this manner so that we do report on the positive side of what the others, some of the opposition parties are saying. So in an organization, there is an editorial policy. So for us, it's the government first, especially to explain the various programs, because there are many instances where the leadership says that we've not been doing enough to tell why is price of sugar has to be raised, why is the price of electricity has got to be increased. All those things we have to be able to report these things very coherently so that the people understand. If not, we will be failing in our duty. That's our number one priority. The major challenge with Bernama is how to get more people who are well versed in English, because they are well versed in Bahasa Malaysia, and that's going to be a challenge because they only tend to speak to people who know the Bahasa Malaysia. And then in this case, you get this very limited scope. So the idea is you've got to be well versed in both Malay and English. No matter young or old, you've got to be good. So these are the challenges. I hope that answers.
Perhaps a rephrase of that question is, how do you three as editors balance the political sensitivities and business sensitivities, and also encourage your young reporters to stick to ethical reporting and reporting the truth? You know, there are certain editorial policies to adhere with every publication, but how do you then translate that or your decisions to train young reporters to become as good editors as yourselves?
If I find somebody who's very eloquent in the writing, that is the person, and we will give as much training as possible to nurture this person to the best of his or her ability. Okay? If we have somebody who takes 1 hour to produce 3 sentences, then I'd say this is the person not for our job. Because in the world of Twitter, the world of Facebook, we got to be fast. I tell them, when you join Manama, I'm not asking you to sing, cook, act. I just want you to write. If you can't write well, this is not a place for you. So if you are good, if you are eloquent, and you are able to gather the facts and come and put everything in a story, then this is the kind of person we want. The more the merrier, because in time to come, then we'll have a very formidable reporting team. But you have maybe 3 or 4 stars and the rest are mediocre, then that's going to be a challenge. And so that's why now we have this editorial policy as well, to only take the best, and we don't tangkap muat, as we say in Bahasa Malaysia. We just fill in the places, the empty spaces that we have. Because if we take somebody who is just average, he or she is going to stay with us for the next 45 years, and that's going to be then very, very agonizing for the editors.
Well, all newsrooms, they have editorial policies, but we journalists, we have also principles, and one of them is like our first obligation is to the public. And sometimes this comes into conflict with the editorial policy. And the question is, what happens when it does? I think it has nothing to do with the junior journalists. It's actually to do with the editors. And then we have to, I was fighting all the time with my board of directors. And I told them, look, if you interfere in the newsrooms, the public will know, we lose credibility, and it's going to hurt our bottom line. So I told them, look, you stay away, and let us do our job, and we will improve the bottom line. Of course, it never improved, because it's a small paper and everybody's facing competition. But still, I think that's the argument that all the people who run the newsrooms have to use when they face with being confronted by attempts to interfere from the owners. And then at some stage, you have to, and these editors have to decide, no, I cannot be responsible for what is going to be published or broadcast tomorrow, because that goes against my principle of journalism. When you sacrifice that principle of, serving the public first and foremost, I think you cease to be a journalist. And then you can either forget about being a journalist, and the public will know, in their eyes, you lose credibility. And this is already happening. People have stopped or have cancelled their newspaper subscriptions. They have stopped watching news, TV news, because they don't think they are credible.
I'm very lucky because of technology, and I'll explain that. Our policy is no compromise, and perhaps I'm lucky because I'm also in the Philippines. But no compromise. There are 5 of us in Rappler, about 40, only 5. We started it, right? And the 5 of us, the Marites Vitug wrote the book on Supreme Court on the judicial corruption. My editor-in-chief, Glenn DeGloria, wrote the book on military corruption in 2011. Our investigative director wrote the book on media corruption. She wrote 2 editions of it. And I'm focused on security and terrorism in my last 2 books. My last book is From Bin Laden to Facebook. the five of us, there's several more of us who came from traditional news groups. We've developed a reputation. Our society knows who we are, and that's part of the credibility that Rappler has. Having said that, we hired 20-somethings, and the 20-somethings are important because they're digital natives, and they come up with the workflows that we wouldn't have thought about, and they're idealistic. So it's not just the 20-somethings who are idealistic. The 50-somethings can also be idealistic, but it's about editorial. It's about integrity and principles. How far will you go for it? So we joke among the five of us, we just trade who has the death threat for the week. But I say it that way only because our being high profile also helps protect you. And that's part of it. So the first is, I don't think you should ever, I've worked moving from CNN, I worked for ABS-CBN, and there are interests you need to protect, but my CEO, the owner of the company, the Lopez family, actually said, professionalize it. So I did, but there are always costs to it. The thing I like now about being small and agile is that you move faster, we break things faster because of technology, and people will follow you. And even though we're small, the other more established news groups have no choice but to follow if we're ahead. So I think this is a time, I go back to that disruption. You can be idealistic. I think this is a time when you can help change your society. I think journalists have great power right now.
Yeah, it's 1 o'clock, but before you go, there's some announcements. But just to wrap it up, the dark days of journalism could be over. Because as Maria says, technology is there. So to the young journalists, I think a journalist is only as good as the sense of value, sense of natural value, and also your obligations to the people. That's what journalism is all about, isn't it? Okay, now there are more questions that you have, but I would like to invite you to the second session where questions and curly questions could be asked, and we will end the day with some concrete outcomes. The announcement for today, UPI Next has suggested or proposed a training program for young journalists. The training program is on media ethics. If you're interested, here is a sheet of paper. Please put your email addresses on the sheet of paper, and then when the program is ready, you will be contacted by UPI Next for a training. And where will the training be held? You know?
It would be a Malaysia-centric.
Malaysia-centric. So the final details will not be ready until later, but the training program is available to journalists and also public members. Okay, and
just to clarify,
yeah.
the training is not on media ethics, but on a practicum focused on a very specific issue in the country, but we will follow up for those who are interested.
Okay. I'll just pass this around. Can you please put your contact addresses if you're interested? Otherwise, you can just pass it down the row. And before we go, we'd like to give our three speakers a round of applause. The second session is at 2 o'clock in this room. Please, you're invited to come.